Here's Mark and Suzanne revolutionizing radio.
Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of the Mark and Suzanne Show. I am Mark. She is Suzanne, and she's back from her slacker days from last week. We're glad you joined us here at the Cerberus Radio Network, where we truly are trying to revolutionize radio. You know why? Because radio actually needs to be revolutionized. It's kind of bland out there. So we're glad you joined us here. We're a live call-in program. You can call anytime you'd like at 717-467-1736, 717-467-1736, and we'll put you right through and you can join the conversation as we discuss how to revolutionize radio, and in doing so, revolutionize your thinking. I'm Mark. Like I said, she's Suzanne. Welcome back, Suzanne, you slacker. You left me here by myself, and I ended up with Jeff Johnson, producer extraordinaire of the Mark and Suzanne Show, by the way.
Jeff, I'm so sorry to leave you unattended with Mark. It is now the Mark and Suzanne Show, not the Mark or Suzanne Show. I listened to it. You guys did a great job. Thank you for letting me back on. I appreciate it. I think we've had, my son had surgery. You had a health scare. I went on vacation. Folks, we promise we are going to make it the Mark and Suzanne Show. And we've got a lot of exciting things for you today. I think we came together a few minutes before the show. I heard a podcast I was listening to. We don't all see eye to eye on this network. We're all on the same side, but we have a little bit of differences here at Cerberus Radio Network. You can find us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. We're also on SoundCloud. We have Facebook as well, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. I have my page as well, Suzanne Sherman. It's out of commission right now. This is attraction temporarily closed. I think I am sending greetings from behind the Iron Curtain in Facebook penitentiary here. We're going to get into what happened there, but it is Facebook stocks plummeted, I think $120 billion subsequent to my banning. Coincidence? I think not.
That's pretty clever.
But I think it's an indication that people are tired of having the message be skewed in one direction over the other. You know, I was using the analogy, if you go to a restaurant that constantly serves you bad food, you know they're spitting in your food, they're rude to you, they don't want your business, much like we saw the little red hen back east, I think in Virginia. Do we really want to participate in that form? Unfortunately, right now, we really don't have much of a choice. But here's what got me banned. And then we're going to get to the bigger point of the issue today of our show is, this system that we are under, was it a failure from the beginning? Was it a Trojan horse? It's going to be a really, really good discussion. But here's what happened. Mark, there's a side that will not tolerate dissension or disagreement in any form, no matter how cordial you try to be. And this is where we are today. And what happened to me, I'm not complaining that I got banned from Facebook, but it's a symptom of a much bigger problem. A girl that I know, and I've realized I have to start unfollowing a lot of people that have these followers themselves that will not tolerate any sort of, again, difference of opinion. And there was a picture of a canvas shopping bag that said, I went to Planned Parenthood, and I'm going to paraphrase. And what I got was a free breast exam, health check, STD check, low-cost birth control, all these other things, except one. Why not be honest and say what else you can get there? And I said, well, you're very fortunate. Millions of others have not survived that experience. Right. And this one gal went to my wall and came back and said, I see you like to murder animals for fun. And you think at the same token, it is awful to take a clump of cells from a woman's body. And then there was all this other, sentiment expressed there. I cut and pasted it. I put it in quote, and I said, here's what we're up against. And I think I even tagged you, Mark, and Jeff. And I said, this is the mentality we're up against. These people that live their lives to rescue animals, God bless them. That's a worthy endeavor. But sure, please don't say that unborn human beings don't rise to the level of dogs. They don't raise the significance, the relevance of dogs. People, this is a very sad commentary. Not only that, but those who control the message in social media agree with them. I got banned for my participation in that post. Her boyfriend, who called me an effing backwards Trump pro-Trump. You find one pro-Trump post, one MAGA post, one MAGA meme on my social media, anywhere. You won't. I'm not a Trump hater. I don't believe that we need to put all our hope in one person, but that's all these people can do. It's their guy or our guy. And if you're not for their guy, you're a Nazi, you're Hitler. This is why we have devolved. So we have to ask ourselves, how did we get to this point? Well, again, we have other podcasters on our network who I respect highly. And I was listening to Mike Meharry today on the 10th Amendment Center on an older podcast saying that those who are faulting the Constitution or say that the Constitution is a failure, well, that's just plain dumb. And blaming the Constitution for its failures is like blaming a marriage or blaming a contract if people breach the terms of the contract. And here's where people just don't understand what we're trying to convey. This isn't a blame game. It's a solutions game. If you want to feel good about yourself and go blame the Democrats, you can listen to any other show right now. There are a whole bunch of them you can listen to that's going to say these so-and-so Democrats. And then you can say, yeah, it's their fault. But guess what? If you fall into that dialogue, you're part of the problem as well, because you are falling into their hands, taking the bait, bread and circuses, allowing the distractions to rule the narrative, while the true forces of what's going on is the failed system itself allowed this to happen. The Constitution was the platform by which tyranny, Ben Franklin knew that it would result. And you know what? If we're dumb, some of the guys in here, John Taylor of Caroline, this is a book, Forgotten Conservatives in American History. John Taylor of Caroline, who's in this book, said that the states, in an ultimate act of sovereignty, created this Constitution. Well, yes, it is up to the states, it's up to the people to rectify the abuses in this Constitution. But as I showed earlier, in how the message has been completely hijacked by the town forum, the town square of the 21st century, let's face it, it's social media. And the message is being censored. We cannot get our thoughts conveyed out there. We have to ask, how did this happen? Mark, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think, is this document right here a sequel to the Bible?
That's a great intro. And I know my good friend Mike Meharry. We've known each other for years and years and years. And so, you know, if politics is anything, it's the art of persuasion. And sometimes in trying to persuade, I use hyperbole. And I will make, as you have heard many times on my radio programs over the years, but it's a useful tool. Hyperbole is actually a useful tool to get people to stop and reconsider or consider something new. And so, but yet Mike raises a very important question that we must discuss at this stage of the game. One of the great problems is that too often hyperbole is used to shut down the very discussion we need to have. And so within the Christian context, I see this all the time in the evangelical community, because as you just alluded to, the Constitution is almost revered. Almost, Suzanne. I mean,
not almost in Utah. This is a sequel to the Bible.
Yes. And
the Mormon Church has said, you know, we had an elder somewhere back there who said this is from God. Well, one of my arguments, and I'm sorry, then I'll get back to you, is God recognizing his own fallibility included Article 5 so man could approve upon his work.
Yeah, it's deeply troubling when you really step back and take a more sterile look at it. See, when we provide our emotions or infiltrate the discussion with our emotions about something we've been told to revere, it really blocks us from taking a more antiseptic or sterile look at this document and say, is there a problem here? You know, as we were talking before the show, I just want to ask the audience to think of it this way. I think we would all agree that the United States government has committed massive level of criminal activity, behavior, crimes against humanity. For example, the United States government, under some peculiar reading of Article 3, has decided that it had the power to legalize the murder of 63 million babies. That's a crime. Murder is a crime by definition, murder, the intentional taking of an innocent life, is criminal behavior. Now, our government has been involved in criminal behavior since 1973 because it legalized it. It made that which was illegal legal. So that's crime number one. So we can indict the United States government for criminal behavior against humanity by legalizing the murder of 63 million babies. We have all complained for decades about the theft from the federal government. Theft is defined in criminal statute in most states, and probably all states, as taking of something from somebody without their consent. Now, again, what does the United States government do? It takes to itself some special authority to alleviate the crime of theft and says it's legal for us to steal from you. Frederick Bastiat called it legal plunder. The federal government has been involved in crimes of its own document that created it. The Constitution requires a declaration of war for there to be offensive military operations. Now, under the inherent powers of the commander-in-chief in Article 2, when we are attacked, it is totally legitimate for him to counterattack. Obviously, if France decides to storm the East Coast and try to occupy South Carolina, you don't wait for Congress to assemble and then create a declaration of war to repel the invasion of France. Now, obviously, France is not going to attack South Carolina, but let's just use that as an example. If some foreign country attempts to attack and occupy the United States of America, the commander-in-chief obviously has a duty to repel the invasion. That's a defensive posture. We don't do a lot of defensive stuff. Now, the clever liars in Washington, D.C. cloak it in we're protecting America's freedom by going to Iraq. You know, come on, guys. We all know enough now to suspend our emotional connection to rhetoric and say we have done a lot of offensive military operations without a proper declaration of war. So they've criminally violated their own document that we all want to hold up and say is the best document since sliced bread. There are numerous indictments that can be made against the United States government that are criminal. Now, what happens when a crime is committed? Detectives show up, right? And they begin to piece together what happened. Let's take murder, for example. Somebody, 911 call goes into the dispatcher. Somebody has been murdered somewhere. The detective shows up and he or she starts assembling all the elements of the crime. They start figuring out the motive. Why did it happen? How did it happen? Who did what, when, where, and how? And they begin to formalize in their mind the motivation, the structure, the tool that was used to commit the murder. A crime was committed. It's called forensics. You go back and you look at how did this occur. Now, sometimes crimes aren't discovered for decades, and you really have to dig back a long ways to assemble the facts of the crime. If we accept my premise that the United States government has been engaged in criminal behavior at least since 1973, but much further than that, it's time to do a forensic analysis of how did that occur. It's no longer, like Suzanne said, it's so easy to get distracted with blaming Obama or Hillary or whoever the left is, and then they blame Trump or whoever the right is, whoever the Republican is. That's a total distraction to get you from asking questions about how did this happen. We all went to public school. Well, I shouldn't say all of us, but the majority of the listening audience went to public school. And at some point, we were taught the scientific method, right? We were taught this idea of how we come about new inventions and exploring new ways of doing things. We apply what's called the scientific method to it. And the scientific method really just consists of a number of steps that you take. You create a question. I want to do something. And then you create a hypothesis based on that question. Then you run experiments, then you collect the data from the experiments, and then you analyze the data and say, did our hypothesis hold up? Well, let's apply the scientific method to what occurred in 1787. They asked a question. Essentially, this is what it boils down to. The question was, can a system of government be created that would protect the unalienable right to life, liberty, and hundreds of other unalienable rights, and including property. They created a hypothesis. If we create a government where powers are distributed amongst the separate and distinct branches with enumerated powers, then unalienable rights will be protected. We ran an experiment, came out of Philadelphia, September 1787. The experiment was this 3-branch government that we created and empowered. So now we have to collect the data from the hypothesis, from the experiment we ran, which was the creation of this government. We have to now collect data. Here's what we know. This system of government has sanctioned the murder of 63 million babies. This system of government has sanctioned the theft of over $21 trillion, roughly $4 trillion annually. This system of government has created and defends a massive collection of private data without warrants, in clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. This system of government has murdered hundreds of thousands of people during offensive military operations without proper declaration of war. The list of indictments can go on and on and on and on. That's just those facts that I'm giving you are beyond dispute. The CDC records how many babies are murdered every year. It records it. Now, not all states report, so the number is actually considerably higher. But the Center for Disease Control collects data that the states report to it. It issues a report every year. It's usually 2 years behind. The latest one, I think, was 2015. And they inform us how many legal murders occurred. Now, of course, the idea of legal murder is an oxymoron. You can't have a legal murder, but we figured out a way to do it. So the data against the United States government, the indictments against them are clear. Nobody can dispute them. How did this happen is now what must be discussed. And we are juvenile to not discuss it, to say somehow we're going to isolate this document that created this system. If the Constitution is anything, it is an organizing document. It creates the legislative branch, Article 1. Article 2 creates the executive branch. Article 3, it creates the judicial branch. Article 4 talks about how the states interact. Article 5 talks about how the Constitution's changed. Article 6 talks about the Supremacy Clause. Article 7, how it's ratified. It's not that this, Suzanne, back to your point, this is not a divinely breathed document. The Apostle Paul, the Apostle James, the Apostle Peter, the Apostle John did not appear in 1787 in Philadelphia and say, I have a new word for this new people in this country called the United States. The new word is Article 1. We are going to create a legislative branch. Thus saith the Lord, a legislative branch will be declared. Thus saith the Lord, an executive. Folks, knock it off. If you can't separate your emotions from this document, you are of no value in this fight. You're of no value because you will refuse to look at the very thing that I'm willing to have the discussion. I'm willing to debate this till the cows come home because I think I can make a case that Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause, combined with Article 2, the appointment clause of the executive branch, creates the power for them to create the EPA. Where heretofore, well, maybe 10 years ago, I'd have said the EPA is not a constitutional entity. Well, there's certain parts of the necessary and proper clause we don't like after the comma. We don't like that part. So we just quote the first part of the necessary and proper clause and say, it's not in the aforementioned powers. Read after the comma. What's there? And then put that with the appointment power where ministers and consuls, I think it says, is explicitly ministers of what? Or government heads of what? Of the 3 branches? Well, it can't be that because the Constitution already delegates who's the head of the 3 branches. In the House is the Speaker, and the Senate is the President pro tem. It can't be the executive power because he can't appoint himself. he can't be discussing appointing the judiciary because that's in Article 3. So who is it? Who's this mystical group of power in the appointments clause that the Constitution gives power to the president to appoint? So I think I want to have this discussion. So we end up with the appointment power appointing these agency heads who now tyrannize us like crazy. But I don't any longer make the case that agency can't exist under the Constitution, because I just took a step back. I cleared my mind of the rhetoric and the emotional connection to the Constitution in Philadelphia, all that. I cleared my mind of it, and I said, all right, let me apply forensics here. Let me apply the scientific method to this, and let me see if perhaps there's something wrong somewhere else. That's just the mature way to look at this. If we are going to insist that everything stay as it is because it's the best thing since sliced bread, then you're not actually going to be part of the solution to the problem that we face.
I hear that all the time. Well, come up with something better. I'm happy to come up with something better. First, we have to have the discussion. I think there's an echo there. First, we have to come up with a means by which we can disassociate ourselves from a system that is fundamentally broken. And this is very important when you say we have to, like, I practiced criminal defense when I was an attorney, and people would say, how could you represent somebody that, so-and-so? Well, here's the thing. Oh
my, Jeff.
So here's the thing. How do we get out from under a system that has been used to suppress us? Thank you, Jeff. You totally derailed my train of thought. We have to be technical as lawyers. We have to disassociate ourselves emotionally and do our job. Getting back to what you mentioned about the non-defensive wars, we have gone even on December 8th, 1941, FDR went to Congress seeking a declaration of war. We have abrogated that. We have abrogated that responsibility to have that appropriate check and balance and maintain ourselves now in a perpetual state of war. Even when George Bush Jr., George W. said, we're spreading democracy throughout the world. Wait a minute. Why did we stand for that? We are going to bomb other people into freedom. And we have allowed that. We've kicked this hornet's nest. And I'm told I'm very anti-American and not patriotic for trying to recognize the fact that being in a perpetual state of war, which is something the founders feared, with the standing army is going to bring about, as Jay Madison said, a standing army would bring about debt, it would bring about war, it would bring about taxes and tyranny and rule over the many by the few. That was an absolutely accurate prognostication. And I want to also address the issue that you mentioned before, the second half of the necessary and proper clause. I talk about the elastic clauses all the time, as do you. In fact, I was on K-Talk Radio yesterday, and as we were talking about the Bill of Rights and the 10th Amendment and unconstitutional laws, a caller joined in the discussion and said, well, I believe in the Commerce Clause, and I also believe in the 14th Amendment. And that's how government has the authority to regulate marijuana, have national reciprocity, and to regulate drugs. So I said, okay, fine. We have these elastic clauses that were used to exponentially expand beyond its traditional restraints. This form of government, we have, as you said, necessary and proper, the Commerce Clause, Supremacy Clause, all of these, we the people, even though the preamble had no legal meaning here or legal effect, that's been used as well. So let me just read to the audience now the second part, because when you combine after the comma, because we like to say necessary and proper, meaning with regards to the foregoing 1 through 8.
Like that.
We have to look forward on the other side of this comma, because I think your argument is very valid. It legitimizes the existence of the EPA and everything else in the implied powers concept. So here is the clause, the sentence in its entirety. Then I'll focus on the clause, necessary and proper clause. And this is in Article 1, Section 8 at the very beginning, before Section 9. to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers.
We like that. We like that part.
I like that. I like that. But there's a comma there. And all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. It's right there. So they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want. It is that, I think that is the most nefarious clause in this entire document, because they can say, well, look at this. We can do whatever we want. We have a department with the executive branch has an FBI. We can spy on anybody. Might as well create an NSA while we're at it. You know, it is patriotic. We have a Patriot Act to back it up. And this is what we see, this circular reasoning where we have an unconstitutional statute to justify the existence of an unconstitutional bureaucracy. And then we can go back to our little sequel to the Bible and see that it's right there. They can do what they want. And this is where we are today. And we were talking about before the show, had the communications abilities and technology been then what we have now, the agrarians who are busy going about their lives, because face it, they had a harder life than the lawyers, the mercantilists, and the financiers living in New York City and in New England. Had they been aware of what has been foisted upon them, I think there would have been a mass exodus from this agreement long before. And in fact, right around the 1800 time, the northern regions threatened to secede twice because the southern states were putting roadblocks to their plans for stronger central governments from the very beginning. They said, we don't like that. They're stopping us from doing what we want to do. Never mind, it's unconstitutional. They're stopping us. We're just going to leave. But when the southern states who were funding the northern capitalists in New England from the tariffs, and when the Morrill tariff came down, and they said, you know, we've had enough. We're going to leave. It's our right to do so. We can. See you later. We want to do this peacefully. We know what happened. And that was not a civil war. And that's the problem. Again, as you mentioned earlier, we have been defrauded by an educational system, which is a product of this general government. It has taken over the message, again, being conveyed with the media and the education system. We are compelled to believe in this system of government, and to go away from it and try to abandon it is unpatriotic.
I know it. Suzanne, you know, in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 9, it says this: what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. This shouldn't surprise us, this conversation. This shouldn't really surprise us that this government built by the Constitution has gotten out of control. There's nothing new here. I mean, this has just happened in different systems and different forms of government. This has happened throughout history. Governments consolidate power to themselves, and then governments are filled with fallen people. Some of the fallen people that are attracted to government are people that do like power. They actually do crave it, and they enjoy exercising it over people. So as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, this really shouldn't be a surprise to us that we are where we are. Now, as you just said, we just need to calmly engage this and not be afraid of where it might lead us, because Suzanne, you'd have heard me back in 2008 making pre-comma arguments about Article 1, about the necessary and proper clause. I would stand up there in front of audiences on the radio and say, yes, the necessary and proper clause limits the power of Congress to the foregoing problems, because I didn't want to deal with the after comma problem. So conservatives love the pre-comma part of the necessary and proper clause because they think it makes their case that Congress can't do all these things. Well, number one, we've seen Congress totally bastardize a number of the provisions in Article 1, Section 8. So that's, and then backed up by the Supreme Court, by the way. But if you take that clause after the comma, now suddenly we have this mysterious, let me bring it up here again real quick. We have this mysterious powers that are vested in the Constitution, Article 2, Article 3 of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. Now, obviously, in Article 1, Section 8, we've got the creation of a kind of a postal office. We've got the creation of a Navy. And so there are some departments that you could glean out of Article 1, Section 8. But there's also this other mysterious group of departments that we find in Article 2. Let me bring that up real quick.
While you're bringing that up, let's also reconcile that with the fact that all legislative procedures shall come from Congress. That means they can't delegate. But here it almost implies that it says they can. So which is going to rule? All legislative authority comes from Congress, or that they can have all laws vested by the Constitution or any department or officer thereof. So I'm not really sure which one carries the weight here, because this is pretty clear language when you get to Article 1, Section 1. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a House and the Senate of Representatives. But then we go to Article 1, Section 8, just before Clause 9, and all other powers vested by this Congress in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. There is no requirement that those people be elected representatives. Mm-hmm. That's how we've gotten away from this accountability that we went to war to have to escape parliamentary sovereignty. Right here, folks, I underlined it in red, is parliamentary sovereignty. We surrendered our revolutionary legacy in 1787. You want to blame us for failure over 200 years? You go ahead. But this allowed it right here. There is nothing any American citizen could have done to stop this runaway freight train. The coals were fired up. The track was sent to go off a cliff. It was only a matter of time. And that's when they fired it up. That's right there.
And folks, this is why this conversation needs to occur. Let's merge Article 1, Section 8, necessary and proper clause after the comma, with Article 2, the executive branch. It says this: under his appointment powers, he, the executive, shall have the power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior offices as they think proper in the president alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. So you have all this verbiage in Article 2 when combined with Article 1, and then Marshall defining for us what the necessary and proper clause means. This goes back to our judicial review discussion earlier, a few shows back. Marshall decides to tell us what that means. And so it's an elastic clause. It can mean it can allow the government to grow where necessary. Well, I don't think it's a big leap to actually say the Constitution permits that. When I just read those two clauses combined, I don't think I used to not think this way, guys, until I took time and tried to take an antiseptic approach to this, try to get the emotions out of my mind about Philadelphia and the the war for independence and all that, tried to just break all that down. And I went on a forensic hunt and said, how did this happen? How did we get to where it's now legal to murder children and steal trillions of dollars? I mean, if you just take those two indictments, at some point you can't say, well, we just have to get more Republicans in power. Somehow that solves the problem. That obviously has not solved any problems.
Okay, wait. Republicans in power. We have the White House. We have the House. We have the Senate. Planned Parenthood continued to be funded. We still have Obamacare, and let's see, there's still no wall. I don't care. I don't think walls is the solution to our problems. We got to stop making it profitable for people to come here illegally. Until we do that, a wall is eventually going to serve more use keeping us in than anybody out. Yeah. So be careful. Be careful what you wish for. But Mark, I want to get back to where we went wrong. Early on, we had the Whiskey Rebellion, which was really a manifestation of the conflict we had between the mercantilists, the lawyers, the financiers in the New England area, and we had the agrarian, so the former being represented by the Hamiltonians, and the latter now the Jeffersonians, the agrarians who believed in the small limited government and took the former at their word that that's what this document would protect the interests of both. We would have the best of the elements of a central government and the best of the decentralized government, but that relied upon the lack of disingenuity that we are seeing now. I think Hamilton, and Brian McClanahan in his book, How Hamilton Screwed Up America, eloquently explains how Hamilton was essentially wringing his fingers when he wrote his arguments in the Federalist Papers, trying to assuage the fears of those that did not want to ratify this document. So we had the Whiskey Rebellion because we had a tax that now was imposed unfairly upon agrarians. And then we saw those people and their rebellion to it stamped out unconstitutionally. There was no request by the governor of Pennsylvania for Hamilton, who abrogated his role as Treasury Secretary, who now became Secretary of Defense, and decided to go and bring in a force to quell this rebellion. Also, something that's not talked about is the Louisiana Purchase. Thomas Jefferson is hailed as a hero for the Louisiana Purchase. It was a treaty that required the advice and consent of Congress. He felt it was unconstitutional himself. He said, we need a constitutional amendment for me to go in and acquire all this land. Madison and some others in Congress, it's really not necessary. You don't have to. But Thomas Jefferson went to his grave feeling that he should have, that it was unconstitutional. But expediency required we get it done or we will miss this opportunity. That justification of expediency we hear now all the time. We have got to do something right now. Millions are going to die if we don't get the Affordable Care Act passed. This has to happen now. Millions are dying as a result of government, with results, because of these unconstitutional wars. Ask the people of Yemen and Libya how our Constitution is working out for them. So this is not just a problem that is encapsulating us in this landmass, this continental landmass here. This disease is spreading around this entire globe. Yeah. People aren't going to like me saying that, but that's the truth. So Thomas Jefferson, and if you look at it this way, people say, well, if it weren't for the Louisiana Purchase or these treaties, guess what? You wouldn't be living out in Utah. Maybe, maybe not. But the expansion of these territories and the war leading into more land grabs and the treaty we had with Mexico is what ultimately led to the conflict that we call erroneously the Civil War. Remember, civil wars when two factions fight to control a geopolitical entity. That's not what the Civil War was. The CSA just wanted to leave. The Confederate States of America just said, I'm sorry, this union, this marriage, political marriage isn't working out. May we resolve this peacefully? Yeah. To which Lincoln replied, not only no, but hell no. Go ahead, Mark.
He sure did. Hey, we got a caller. Andrew has called in here. He wants to weigh in this conversation. Andrew, welcome to the Mark and Suzanne show. I'm Mark. She's Suzanne. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mark. Hey, Suzanne. First.
Whoop. Hello? Yep, there you are. You're back. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, good. Hey, Mark and Suzanne. First off, welcome back, Suzanne.
Thank you.
I had a comment on the elastic clauses. I have heard Kevin Gutzman make the point that it doesn't make a lot of logical sense that the framers would have enumerated the delegated powers and then turned around in the next sentence and said, unless you want to do anything else, and then it's okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there and see what you guys thought about it, and I will go ahead and get off the line and listen to your response.
Okay. Hey, thanks so much for calling, Andrew. By the way, if you want to join the program, you can anytime by calling 717-467-1736. We'll get you in just like Andrew just called. Well, I think Kevin's right. I think Kevin's exactly right on this. It doesn't make any sense, but a lot of this doesn't make any sense. This is a great problem, isn't it? But this goes back to the discussion we had a few weeks ago about judicial review. Marshall decided to expand it, the definition. But, we have to also ask a question. And this is one of the great problems in even understanding how to interpret the Constitution. There is not uniform agreement on how to even interpret it. So when you apply the science of interpretation, also called hermeneutics, to the Constitution, there are a couple of three camps that use various approaches to interpreting the Constitution. Marshall, I think, probably appropriately now in hindsight, understood the after the comma section of Article 1, Section 8, and combined it with Article 2 and said there's pretty vast powers here. There's actually very vast powers. They can do what they want. Now, Kevin's point, if you're an originalist, you would go back to what were they trying to do in the Philadelphia Convention during the debate. So we have a lot of the notes from Madison and others who were taking notes, Robert Yates, who were taking notes during the convention. We kind of can know to a degree what they were trying to do, certainly during the ratification, certainly in Virginia. We have a great deal of information about what they were understanding was supposed to have gone on in Philadelphia, and they're arguing for or against the ratification of the Constitution. So if you're an originalist and you go back to that, you're interpreting the Constitution through what the ratifiers believed it was doing. Well, then you can conclude that it's a limited document. But even having said that, there were many people debating during the ratification that were warning people this is not a limited document. This is not. And what do we find out today? It actually is not a limiting document. It doesn't limit the government. But Kevin's point is exactly spot on. It doesn't make intuitive sense to us. Why would they list these foregoing powers that appear to limit the government's power, but then authorize it to do much, much more? Well, I don't want to get to motives because I don't know any of the founders. I wasn't there, or the framers. I wasn't there during the ratification. I can just read what I can read about the debates. I don't get to motives, but what I can do is go to what is factual. And here's what we know. We know certainly in the Virginia debates, there was a massive division about this Constitution. You've got Patrick Henry, George Mason, and others just railing against this thing. Now, the ratification is a political process. They're going to vote at the end. They're going to take a vote, and the majority ratify or not ratify. It is purely political, so they're all on the floor banging desks and making these arguments for or against the ratification of the Constitution. What we do see emerging out of those debates, and we know there's parallel debates up there in New York. That's why they're writing the Federalist Papers. They're trying to defend the Constitution up there. It's in trouble. And they're making political arguments why, hey, guys, you don't have anything to worry about with this Constitution. It's going to limit the government. The government's not going to be big out of this thing. And then you got Henry and Mason and others saying, oh, no, George Clinton, wait a minute. This is a bad idea. Let's not do this. You can't say this is some hollow document when during the very debate of its being empowered, people are saying, don't do this. Now, let's go to the amendments to the Constitution. Yes, they are part of the Constitution now. But why right out of the gate? They could just take a sterile look, step back, I speak with emotion, I get that. But just take a sterile look at this, try to be antiseptic. Why right out of the gate? September 18th and forward to June 21st, 1788, why are they already trying to amend it? My good friend Scott Strelzik, I'll get this exact number between now and the next show. He calculated how many amendments were actually offered by all the states during this period of time. I'll correct it if I'm wrong, but it's in the hundreds of amendments that were actually offered. Now, only 10 went on to be ratified, and we call them the Bill of Rights. But let's even take the 10th Amendment. Why was the 10th Amendment even put in there? If the original Constitution was so great as written out of Philadelphia, September 17th, 1787, why did they ratify the 10th Amendment that provided further declarative restrictions or clauses on the misuse of this new Constitution? Why? This is the antiseptic approach, folks, we have got to take to this document. But you can only do that if you demystify it, if you de-divine it. I know it's not a term, but I make them up all the time on the air. If we de-something it, so we can just forensically analyze it without emotions, you're going to conclude, I think, what I concluded. There's a lot more power in that thing to grow a big government than we think that's there. And so, go ahead.
Sorry.
Suzanne.
I think Andrew's call, and again,
Great.
we have an echo here. Andrew's call and your comment afterwards show how this is a failure. And that is because we have, again, this conflicting text in here. And why would we have Article 1, Section 8, and then say it makes no sense to do whatever you want? They are doing it. You can analyze it all you want. It still happened. If two people get married and the union does not work out, do we blame the marriage certificate or do we blame the people that have failed it? Well, I say if the certificate maybe said the husband can go out whenever he wants, see all the women he wants, do what he wants, beat her when he wants, I would blame the marriage certificate. I see the other side, but I think as we have illuminated in this show, we have shown the inconsistency in Article 1, Section 8 with the enumerated powers, and then Part 2, the post-comma in necessary and proper, to show they really did surreptitiously build in this power where they could now start saying, well, we have these implied powers. And that's what Hamilton wanted from the very beginning. He knew they were shut down, and therein lies the difference really between Hamilton and Madison. Madison understood that the Virginia plan was shut down in the Philadelphia Convention. Hamilton, not happy with defeat, played the game, and then once he got in power, used his position to do what was rejected outright at the beginning. Who made it to our currency? Who did not?
That's a good point.
Thomas Jefferson's relegated to the $2 bill. Nobody uses anymore. Funny thing is, when I was at the campsite yesterday, we were on our way. I was taking my son to have some pancakes at the cookout there at the KOA. And these people were talking politics. And I thought, not going to do it, not going to do it, not going to do it. I'm on vacation, I'm on vacation, I'm on vacation. And then as I walk up to sit down, apparently they were talking about debt. And this man says, well, Thomas Jefferson said that debt was good because it makes people work hard. So he was justifying this ridiculous debt that we have now. And I said, well, Thomas Jefferson also said that it is immoral for one generation to bind future generations in their debt. And then this other table, they started cracking up. And then I said, really, if we're going to talk Jefferson, let's at least be realistic here. Yeah. So I went to the bathroom to wash my hands, and I come back to sit down. Everybody's gone. I said, I cleared the house. I didn't mean to. But, we have been indoctrinated to, as you said, pick and choose. We cherry pick the parts of the Constitution and the parts of the founding generation that we want to go with it to justify this system that we have here. John Adams, if we're gonna quote people, also said that this system we have is entirely unsuitable for a population that is neither moral nor virtuous. So we have abandoned our virtues. We have brought in, and we've discussed the 1965 Immigration Act and how it changed our immigration policies to one that has taken away our homogeneous society, even though we had these fundamental differences among the colonies and then the states that they became, the sovereign states that they became, by bringing in people around the world that have absolutely nothing in common with us and trying to say, well, under plans of diversity, we want to bring you in. The founders also said that a society that is divided cannot fight effectively tyranny. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. There's an interesting article. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but it was about how tyranny, about what a next civil war would look like. And it was very disconcerting, because I think the point of the article was that these people could fight tyranny if we could get along. And going before the Civil War, how they were able to actually, Custer was at a wedding, I'll bring the article up in a moment, they were still able to have dialogue that we cannot have, that we're not seeing today. And the article is called "America's Next Civil War Will Be Worse Than Our Last." And again, this goes under the auspices of that was a civil war in the first place. But here's the example here. And the author is, this came out June 26th, and it was written by H.W. Crocker III on the summer of 1862, just weeks before the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single fighting day in American history. George Custer, Union Captain George Armstrong Custer, attended a wedding of Confederate Captain John Gimlet Lee at Bassett Hall in Williamsburg, Virginia. And he was the best man. The Union officer was dressed in blue, Confederate in gray. And at one point, one of the members said to Custer, "You should be in our army. We would give," and because, "what would you give me if I resigned my commission in the Northern Army and joined the Southern?" Well, they had a cordial discussion about the matter. Now, let's go back to where we started the show, where I made a simple comment in disagreement with somebody about the issue of murdering the unborn and how it exploded. We don't have that civil discourse right now. We are seeing the acknowledgement that it is okay to be discourteous, to throw people that disagree with you out of a restaurant, that it is okay to physically harm, to rip off a hat of a teenage boy and dump a drink on him. That guy was prosecuted. We'll see what happens. They brought some charges up against him, but we don't have that civil discourse anymore. If we had been separated geographically like we were then, the fighting would have started some time ago. So the question is, I don't think a bloody battle is a way to solve this, but I also don't think voting, hoping, coping, as you say all the time, and just voting harder, use that Sharpie or just pound that lever, is getting us where we want. Those of us that call ourselves conservatives have now said, well, we have the White House, we have both houses of Congress, we're getting our Supreme Court justices. What changes are we seeing? Yes, we're seeing some improvements. It's better than if Hillary were in office, but can't we in turn do even better than this by rethinking this American Union? What was that, is that Don Livingston's book? Yes, Rethinking this American Union. In fact, and I'm going to start going through that book, and I want to bring that in to these shows and let people know it's okay to dive into deep waters and really think about how we can make this better. Or you can stay with the morning shows and point the finger at your Democrat counterparts and feel good about yourselves because you were part of the argument, part of the discussion, but you're not part of the solution.
Right. And that's key, Suzanne. If you're interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, then we're not the show for you. If you can go to Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh and just keep rearranging the chairs and nothing ever good happens. Change does happen. Don't be mistaken for a moment. Change happens. It's largely large change, bad change. Right now it's 9:53 here in Oklahoma. Our abortion mills have fired up here for the day. They've probably already butchered 1 or 2 babies. So you want change. Change is happening. It's happening, but it's very bad change. Babies are being ripped apart. More of your property and income has been stolen from you today. So if you think rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic is the solution, then talk to Rush Limbaugh. He'll tell you how bad Hillary was or would have been or who the next Democrat is. He'll be glad to tell you that. We here are going to deal with truth and the facts of the matter as they are on the ground. There's a term I want to draw everybody's attention to, and it's one that I have used routinely here in the past few years, Suzanne. It's the difference between a de facto government and a de jure government. If the Constitution was what people believed it was, and it had some kind of limiting power or restraining power, we would actually have a de jure government that lived within the confines, the supposed confines of Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, Article 2 and Article 3. We would have these clear delineations of power and the government would actually be very small. The federal government would be very small. It's one of the reasons people can refer back to the first and second generation after the Philadelphia Convention and harken back to those days. Why? Because the federal government really hadn't grown to be this verbose power in our lives. It hadn't really become this dominant figure. Most people didn't have much interaction with it unless you were a whiskey farmer out in Western Pennsylvania. Then you had interaction with the federal government, and it wasn't a good one. But by and large, most people didn't pay income taxes. You didn't really run into the federal government very much. But the seeds were there for it to continue to grow to where we now have a de facto government, which actually, well, let me rephrase that. We may actually have a de jure government if my interpretation of Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause after the comma, combined with Article 2, we may actually have a de jure government. Think of the horror of that.
We might have to tweak Crestlin's creed.
I may have to. It may be a legitimate government. Oh no! Now, but this is what you get when you step back emotionally from this argument and you just take a sterile look at it. I think solutions are in these kinds of conversations, not rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic and thinking, all the Democrats are bad and the problems with them and the vice versa. Like Suzanne just said, I don't want a bloody civil war. Let me be clear, and I think I speak on behalf of Suzanne and the executive producer extraordinaire, Jeff Johnson. None of us want a bloody civil war. Actually, everything we're doing here is trying to prevent one, is trying to say there actually is a way out of this mess. There is. This is one of the great frustrations, Suzanne. There actually is a way out of this mess peacefully, but not if you're insistent on taking back America or taking back Washington, D.C., or controlling the power hub over 320. If that's your objective, then I have no solution for you. Number one, you're going to lose if you're a conservative. The Democrats have made that. The progressives have made that very clear. They are steamrolling everything. Some state here, I'll bet you in the next decade, some state legitimizes pedophilia. It's just around the corner.
We were just talking about an article in California that they're starting to. And remember, going back about 20 years or so, there was a time when homosexuality was deemed a psychological disorder. Now, none of us here are seeking to ban homosexuality. I think what people do in their bedrooms, consenting adults, is between them and God. If they have God in their life or not, they might find out he's there regardless. Not my issue. I don't care to control the lives of homosexuals. I don't have a problem with them living their life. I think the moral majority dramatically overplayed their hand. I think that has been a cause of what we're seeing right now. We can thank the Defense of Marriage Act, by the way, for Obergefell. That we should discuss as well on another show. Case in point, maybe you and I are going to do a couple, one on Obergefell, one on Roe versus Wade. I want to also tell people we have a show here called Case in Point, where I will be picking apart Supreme Court cases and explaining how they are relevant or not relevant today and their constitutional authority to be heard in the first place. But that's a conversation we have to have as well. But when we talk about why this is a failure, the Articles of Confederation were justified as a means primarily for national defense. Under the article, the Constitution, under the Articles, we defeated the greatest military power on the planet. We will continue with that discussion. But, again, we have to also recognize the hypocrisy of requiring our elected officials to take an oath to the Constitution while they actually campaign on promises to violate it. We have now sworn Marxists, communists getting elected into office who are going to uphold the Constitution. No, they're taking an oath knowing they're going to break it. So we're taking an oath on a document we ourselves have allowed to be relegated to irrelevance. We pay lip service to it only. I want to thank everybody for joining. Mark, I'm going to let you wrap up the show.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for joining us. We've had a lively discussion. We're going to have a lot more of these going forward. If you're looking for truth, and how to understand this mess, then tune in here. We're on the Cerberus Radio Network. Jeff Johnson's got a show. Justin Spears has a show. Folks, we're trying to push back against the status quo. It is not an easy task to do. But we're glad you joined us here, Andrew. Thanks for calling in. We'll look forward to more live call-in shows with you as we go forward. Right now, though, you're listening to the Mark and Suzanne Show. I'm Mark. She's Suzanne. We'll see you next week.